you picked a zinger for
Well,
the chapter.
I thought it was to paraphrase uh, Steve McIntosh, uh, why don't we just admit that modernism is the best? Now, and I'm sure he doesn't mean it that way,
No.
uh, but it does tend to. Um, he does offer a challenge to us in our
Yeah.
green based integralness. So, uh,
Yes.
but
Yeah, that was.
the
No, go
actual,
ahead.
I wanted to put that in because I asked it in the context of here we are, we're talking about the mind, and we are going to do aqual, and although I'm not going to drill through, uh, let's go through all those levels and lines and all the rest of that. Um, it does it does point to uh the mind. I mean, that's a thinking thing that's going on, and we are, this is the territory where green, orange, amber, red, and teal are addressed in the Integral Life Practice book. This is the place.
This
So,
this is the meta system. This is the Akbal meta system.
and this
Yeah.
is the place into which Steve McIntosh is speaking.
Yes.
Okay, so I just wanted to say um, and I had a good talk with Ed Dunkerley
Yeah.
past Monday, and he zoomed right in on the integral psychograph, which is this. It's in my
Right.
box there, and
Right.
we were discussing uh, what do you do with that information. So I mean, you've seen this stuff before.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
what ha- have you done any work with this psychograph, or do
No.
you? Okay.
No. It has not been a major focus of my integral involvements. About the lines, really quickly, and we don't have to return to this unless you want to. I question whether some of those lines have anything to do with stages. For instance, what do you call the kinesthetic? That's physical capacity. I don't see that that has anything to do with stages. Why would that be a line that has an amber expression versus a green expression versus a red expression? I mean, you're physically capable or you're not. That's genetics plus exercise. I don't see that that has anything to do with, or musical capacity, for instance. Now, a lot of the lines he names, I think, do. There would be specific stage specific manifestations of those lines, but I'm not sure how thoroughly Wilbur thought all this through. I get the feeling he just threw everything into the bag and moved on. But so, what you can be any level of an athlete or a musician, and I don't see how it would have anything to do with where you are on a stage on the psychograph. So why include that in a psychograph? But that's just a little hair I'm
Well, I
splitting.
think I've got at least. I mean, I have an answer for that. Kinesthetically, um, you got to crawl before you can walk.
Right.
So there's a line there, and you can't run a marathon until you've done some exercise to practice for it. But as a baby, uh, kinesthetic line of development is fairly straightforward, I think. So uh, the line
Yeah.
of how good do you work your body um, is there.
Yes, I don't see what that has to do with the stages as Wilbur's enumerated them. There is certainly a correlation, a rough, like you said, there's a developmental trajectory, and that would aligns with the cerebral development that makes possible going up the stages. But I don't see what a musical line or a physical line or whatever would contribute to a psychograph. It wouldn't tell us anything about where we are in the other parts. For instance, somebody who's a paraplegic, does that mean they're automatically at a very low level? I mean,
Oh,
why would that?
kinesthetic. Yeah, they're at if you're paraplegic, you can't move very much. Yeah. So
Right.
your kinesthetic level is fairly uh at a beginning or uh elementary level of capacity, and
Mhm.
that's where you're at. So if a person say becomes um let's say an integral person becomes that in paraplegic, this is a way of saying, okay, your awareness, the things that you could do before. When Ram Dass had a stroke, you know, okay, his line of development was drastically reduced
Well,
kinesthetically.
but that affected his cognitive
It did,
state.
but
Anyway, this I'm not, I must admit, I'm not very interested in this. I'm more interested in that clip from Steve McIntosh because that hit a very big nail right on the head. Are you aware of the Molotov cocktail that Nora Bateson tossed into the integral world back in 2021? When she posted on her Facebook post. Yeah, this is a very big. This is you know this is a very big deal in the integral world. Nora
okay.
Bateson, who's you know who do you know who she is? Is she a concept? She's kind of a big
No,
deal in
but I know of a Bateson, but I think it's a
yeah,
scientist
it's
guy.
her father, Gregory Bateson, is
Oh,
very important. And she took on, she has her own warm data. A lot of integralists are kind of into it. Well, she's on the one side, she's kind of like the polar opposite of stages. The gal who runs stages. I'm spacing out on her name. Anyway, this is the polar opposite of
hmm.
Kim Barta's sister. Oh, I know her name. Anyway, senior memory. But anyway, Nora Bateson, Gregory Bateson's daughter, is kind of the polar opposite of let's codify all these stages and discuss them. She posted on Facebook back in August of 2021. Stage theory is BS, always has been, and it's colonial as hell. It's got to go. And she ignited a firestorm in certain corners. Because and this is kind of like she's kind of the counterpoint to that clip you showed. And that's partly, I think, what Steve McIntosh was reacting to. I said, no, there are very important ways in which the later developmental stages are better than the earlier ones. Now that clip was taken out of context. In his full over an hour podcast, he made a much more nuanced presentation. But this is a debate that's gonna, and there's some serious soul searching for a while. Suzanne Cook-Greuter actually hosted a webinar on the Integral Life Forum that Jeff Saltzman attended, Nomale Pereira, a number of notables in that world, to discuss. And the topic was, is the English language itself a colonizing force? I mean, the issue of colonization is very woven, this is very green, right? This is, I mean, that statement, that is a very green in the way I
Yes,
introduce it.
I
It's a
think so.
very green statement. No, this is ranking, and ranking is bad. But there are, and on the surface of it, it's preposterous. I mean, are we going to throw out Keegan? And come on, there are developmental stages. But the underlying, and I attended a couple of debates about this, and one with her, Nora Bates, and her basic point is there have been so many horrific offenses committed by colonization that state, even to think about stages, is so contaminated that we must never, just never, we must not deal with it. I'm not phrasing her presentation very, but it did get me thinking, because this gets to the deeper level that Steve McIntosh and you are looking at, is how can we understand and talk about developmental stages without infantilizing the earliest levels of the hunter-gatherer societies, the early agricultural societies. If we start to say, well, the later stages are better, then we're saying that the earlier stages are lower, and that opens the whole can of worms. I mean, I've been really chewing on this because I have a personal stake in this. I'll tell you about later if it comes up. I have a very big personal stake because my creative work is stagist as hell. And here's Nora Bateson saying, this is colonial as hell. I went back and revised some of the stuff I was doing. We need a whole new second tier way of understanding stages, staged and stage development that does not patronize, infantilize, or in any way denigrate the dignity and value of the earlier developmental stages in human society. The hunter-gathering societies, um, the early agriculture societies, the red barbarian warlord stage, the axial religion stage. When how can we define and frame, and even to talk about this, the vocabulary we use has so much subliminal value judgment compacted into the vocabulary we have. Like, we're going to need to develop new ways of thinking, framing, and maybe a new vocabulary to have discussions about this that honor the genuine, where the later stages are better, and they are demonstrably, like a life expectancy of nearly 80 years instead of 27. I'll take it. Without opening the door to all of that horrible stuff, all that horrible baggage we carry in our history, colonialism and oppression and exploitation, and the dark side of the value judging. So this is a very big subject, Larry, and you put your finger right on it with that little clip
Oh,
from Steve McIntosh.
I'm happy to be the instigator. Uh, uh, and sometimes being somewhat new at things, one can point to emperors with no clothes more
Yes,
innocently. Um, when you say stages, are we talking the like in the book, in this is the part where they introduce colors, and so we've got magenta, amber, orange, green, teal. Okay, so is
right.
that the stages you're talking about?
Yes,
Okay, so what we're saying is that it okay, so we're saying that this mythic ethnocentric stage of absolute traditional truths, tribal ethnic stuff, um, when we get to orange and we could become irrational, um, as
that's actually an inaccurate summary there, but I'm a cultural historian,
well, say it
and
the way
so
it let's. I'm not, so I'd love the articulating better done than
okay.
the way I'm shooting off the top with.
Yeah, yeah. And the thing is, Ken Wilber is very fuzzy here too. Here are some places where Ken Wilber, he's a trailblazer and a pioneer. I mean, he's exploring a whole new continent, and he's come back with some very crude maps. And the larger, I mean, the overall, I mean, the four quadrants alone, that right there puts him up there with Plato and Kant, and we can unpack that another time if you like. The overall orientation of his Aqual meta system is is such work of genius, but it's crude. It's a first exploration of this new meta way of understanding, and there's a lot of details that a lot of territory that still needs to be finished. My metaphor for this, it's like the main construction workers have put up the house and the walls are in and the plumbing and so on, but you still have the finish carpenters need to come in and put in the wall boards and the paneling and the cabinets and they have to do the finish. Wilbur did the main construction work, although there's one big structural quibble I have with him. I think there's one structural piece that's flawed, but otherwise I have no argument with any of his basic structural features of Aqual. But a lot of the smaller details he didn't fill in. He's doing the grand exploration, and he
Sure.
said so many times he's leaving it for us to go back and fill in. So a lot of this is filling in the details that he just couldn't because he's got the overview, but he actually got some things wrong. There are areas where he is pronouncing on things that he does not have a detailed knowledge of, and he gets some occasionally gets facts wrong or interpretations wrong. And when it comes to history, he doesn't know history all that as well as he knows some other subjects, and just gets some of his historical stuff wrong. And that's where that comes in, is when he starts tabulating the stages. And he's fuzzy. He goes between a four stage model, or a 6-stage model, or a 5-stage model, and he conflates different stages in different ways at different times. He's inconsistent, and some of his terminology gets misleading for that reason. So where I would love to come in and do some of the Finnish carpenter work, FINNISH, yeah, like FINISH, not that I'm from Finland, but that I'm the carpenter who does the pretty stuff, the pretty details. I'd like to go in and just tidy up some of that, because I think it's a bit messy in ways that are actually misleading at times. And this list of the colors is one. He's inconsistent in some ways. So this complicates any discussion we have. But I mean, his brilliance in taking all of these developmental models, historical, psychological. In fact, he has his book. I mean, the vast amount of material he's surveyed and seen the key underlying patterns, the really important underlying patterns that make more sense out of everything. He's a towering genius there. Let me see where. So I'm not sure where to go from here, because the terminology in that graph you just showed me,
Mm-hmm.
I have an issue. He tends to conflate the mythic. He uses the term mythic for the axial age religions, the great wisdom traditions of the world that came on,
Yeah.
the Christianity, the Islam, Taoism, Buddhism, and so on. Mythic is a misleading word, and it's going to get us in trouble when we try to go out and help with the current political situation. Mythic, when somebody who is not a student of Ken Wilber hears the word mythic, they think of myths, gods and goddesses, pantheons of gods and goddesses. That ties in with the developmental stage of the agricultural societies, the red barbarian warlord stage, when might makes right. That's red. That's where you have pantheons of gods and goddesses. And I've got a handy chart. I'm going to be giving a course in it next year. Up the ages, the various stages, and specific types of government, specific types of religion, specific values, specific technologies, especially specific communication technologies, correlate in every culture I know of around the world with, beige, magenta or purple, red, amber or blue, orange, green. All of them have, family structures, social structures, technologies, religious practices, core values. Each one of those stages has some version of this category, but the specifics vary across cultures for each level. So you can define certain kind of like major organs for each level that are particular to that level and not to the others, that are definitive. And this is my analysis, and I have charted this and so on, and kind of lived with it for about 12, 15 years. So to call the great wisdom traditions mythic implies that they believe in myths like gods and goddesses. No, they believe in some transcendent divine. It may not be a god. I mean, it may be the Tao. It may not be personified, but there is some transcendence that emanates all of existence. And these believe in miracles. They tend to make up legendary stories about their founders, but they don't. They have transcended. Although some include pantheons of gods and goddesses, we're now talking about Jesus Christ or Allah or the Tao, or the Buddhahood, a state of consciousness. We're not talking. The gods and goddesses belong to the red level, and very, very intimately with that. And it actually and the stories, the myths of gods and goddesses form a certain deep psychological function that helps people at that developmental stage consolidate around that developmental stage. If we think what gods and goddesses were, ancient Greeks are the ones we tend to know best. Norse, others, yeah, they have all cultures who get that far have them. But what they are, gods and goddesses are personified two parts, outer and inner, subjective, objective. This is Ken Wilber's left-hand quadrants, right-hand quadrants. The outer, more objective form is forces of nature, like Zeus hurls lightning bolts, or Zeus hurling his spear. That's lightning. Um, the sea, the sea is boiling. Poseidon's angry. He's stirring up the ocean. They also have innate human qualities, capacities that at that red stage, we're up from shamanism, animism now. At the red stage, as individuals, we start to be aware that this capacity for righteous anger is in me. And I can be like Jove and adjudicate and walk into an argument where two people, if I'm the alpha and some of my betas are getting into an ugly fight, I can wade in and kind of grab them both by the scruff of the neck and say, hey, come on, knock it off. I am taking on the role of Jove. I am adjudicating, and I'm using my own anger to be my own righteous anger that these guys are wrecking everybody's party. And I am deliberately calling on my own willpower and my own capacity to use it in a deliberate way, consciously. These were just kind of spontaneous, typically earlier. They're just kind of spontaneous, what energy is moving. But now we are starting to have we are conscious of our inner capacities. Like if I'm a smith and I pray, I do a little prayer to Hephaestus or Vulcan and my at the little shrine in my forge. And now I get to work. I didn't feel like getting up to work today, but it's state, you got to get up to work. We are able to get up when the alarm rings on Monday morning and go to work because we can, by a deliberate act of will, call on one of our innate capacities and set to work and use it. That's a capacity that comes online for most people at the red stage, and that's in children at the individual level. That would correspond to, say, 4 to 7. So when little boys start getting interested in T-Rex and cars, they're interested in power. And the individual development, the Piaget of the development of individuals, of children through teenagerhood into adulthood, goes on very specific stages. This has been researched all over the world. Again, the surface details are different from culture to culture, but certain underlying patterns remain the same across all cultures. And this was Ken Wilber's brilliance, to align Piaget, the cognitive development of individuals, with the evolution of human societies, the stages in human society, a la Gebser. And he relied on Gebser, which led to a couple of weaknesses because Gebser left out some things, but that's for us nerds to quibble over. But Ken Wilber's genius in Up from Eden, in aligning the two, oh my God, do they align? And this is one of my origin stories. I read Up from Eden back in 1983, I think. Had one conversation with Ken Wilber once back in 1983. That's another story. That was fun. But I was a PhD candidate at that time in history, in cultural history, history of art and medieval studies. I was just finishing my PhD, and I read Up from Eden. And it's like, I knew a hell of a lot about human cultural history, just human history in general, you know. Suddenly, but when I read Ken Wilber's book, Up from Eden, suddenly everything I already knew, I mean, nothing didn't necessarily add to that, but it was like I had been seeing it in 2 dimensions all along. This is a metaphor. And now I was seeing it in 3 dimensions, how everything I already knew related to other things in a far more meaningful way. It's like everything suddenly becomes so much more meaningful. It correlated so much. It's kind of like, in a smaller way, like when Newton came up with his 3 laws of motion back in the 1660 whatever, and suddenly humans had been studying the motion of the planets in meticulous detail for thousands of years. And it's just mysterious, and kept trying to come up with theories to explain, or mythical explanations or mechanical explanations. But suddenly Newton comes up with three small mathematical formulae. Force equals mass times acceleration is the one I remember. And suddenly, thousands of years of meticulous observation of the motion of time all made sense. We understand. And that was why they called it the Enlightenment. It was literally enlightening. And this is my case is a smaller example, but I felt a bit of that when I read Up from Eden. It was elated. It's like everything I already knew made so much more sense in a much bigger context. And so I feel like I can honestly poke holes, quibble where I think there are things to quibble with. But Wilbur is one of the genius of the ages, and that was just one of his first strokes of genius. He had a number of others of that magnitude and more later on. Anyway, so
So
that's
if you had a chance to do a short, or we could clip actually one from this if you really were sharp on it and quick to the draw. Um, let's say you were going to do a 30-second or 60-second short on YouTube where you uh, had your aha. If you had to say an aha, the way Steve McIntosh pulled that one out of the context of the story, uh, what at least what give us a hint. I don't expect you to completely articulate.
what's the exact topic here?
Well, what would you say if you had one big aha, like when I saw Steve McIntosh say that about modernity, it was just like two or three sentences, boom. And I went, whoa, he's right. Now I can go back and watch the rest of it in context and see what this whole thing was about. But I
Right.
got my elevator hit from him. He
Uh,
got
uh,
on the elevator with me and he said those words. And by the time we got to the bottom floor and he walked out, I had been changed. So
okay.
I give
So it's
you the
the
chance to change me any way you want.
Okay,
What
the
would that look
elevator
like?
pitch. Yes, Ken Wilber has had many strokes of such awesome genius. In my opinion, he is up there with Plato and Kant, although I have some quibbles to make. But my first big aha with Ken Wilber was in his book Up from Eden, way back in 1983 when I read it, when everything I already knew about cultural history, at the time I was I was finishing my PhD in cultural history. I read Ken Wilber's Up from Eden, and everything I already knew made so much more sense to me. It was like a triple PhD. So
Okay,
that's what
thanks.
I come up with just off the cuff like that. But the really good ones like Steve McIntosh's tend to be spontaneous when somebody's on a roll about something.
I have a second question for you. It sounds to me like you are an advocate of placing mythology as in terms of specifically Greek mythology and maybe some others as well, um, as magenta red level, as in the magic level. Am I correct with
No, red
at
is
the
not
mythic
magic.
level?
Magenta is magic. Red is a completely different. Magenta, it's called purple in spiral dynamics. That's when we were still all hunter-gatherers.
I'm looking for where is it that you put mythology on the in the color scheme?
Okay, and this is where it gets confusing that Ken Wilber is inconsistent. I see 6 stages in first tier. Okay, the bottom one is beige or infrared. Wilbur calls it. That's when we're helpless babies, infants, or that would be the old Stone Age in human cultural
Okay.
evolution.
Okay.
Somewhere around 50,000 years ago, we start seeing cave art, much more complex tools. People start burying their dead with obviously with decorations, rituals, and prayers, carving bone flutes. Culture. People are um, things that look mythological to us, like an ivory carving of a man, only he has the head of this was of a wolf, I believe,
Hmm?
with the oldest image of a human being we have. And this is shamanism. So this is what starting from about 50,000. BCE on, we have evidence there's a huge leap in human culture. This is magic. Of course, shamanism, animism. There's a spirit in every rock and bush and bend in the river. This is the second stage out of the six, right? And in human individual development, that's like, say, age 2 to age 4. Every 3-year-old is a little animist.
Mhm.
If you read about Piaget's experiments, your child's walking down the street, hand in hand with mother or father, and we pass the trees, we pass the houses, but the sun stays at the same level. The sun is following me. The sun is watching me, right? It's like, so every 3-year-old is in that limited sense a little animus. There's a spirit in every rock and bush and bend in the river, and there's
Now, do you
that
call that?
stage.
What word do you use for that? Do you use the word magic? Do you use the word egocentric?
Magic, I would call that, I would label, if we're going to put labels, that is the magic level. That's where you believe you live in a world that is magic. You
Right.
think, and this is Ken Wilber talks, you think that mommy and daddy could change that yucky spinach into potatoes if they wanted to. It's voodoo, juju, the more primitive forms of witchcraft. They're magic. There's a spirit in every rock and bush and bend of the river. And if I just um, uh, um, because my intentions have an effect on people around me, and their intentions have effects on me. This is where
Mm.
people really believe that you can cast curses or blessings and affect the other person. This is early stage magic. People who go to witches and say want them to cook up a magic spell to make so and so fall in love with me. So literally magic. There's there's spirits in every rock and bush and bend in the river, and how we think and how we feel, we can make magic with it. We can
So,
magically influence our surroundings, and our surroundings, the people around us, can magically influence us.
and when you were
That's
talking then,
purple.
okay, if you were then talking about when you were talking about the 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 gods and the goddesses as
That's the next level
agencies
up.
is now mythic, right?
That's
Okay.
mythic, and that's red. That's mythic.
That's
And I would prefer to
okay, so
reserve the term mythic
you
for
would
red, but I think
rather
that's,
have you would rather have mythic be the red color.
I am uncomfortable with using the term mythic to mean sometimes red, sometimes amber. Because in our little ghetto, okay, we can be precise about our definitions, but as we get out to the outer world, when people hear the term myth, they hear, well, myths like the gods and goddesses, like Zeus hurling thunderbolts or Thor swinging his hammer.
How
But they
about
also
Moses
think
parting the Red Sea?
that's a miracle. That's different because Moses was a real human being, a historical human being,
Possibly,
presumably.
possibly.
A flesh and blood human. He was not a god living on Mount Olympus, riding through the air in a magic chariot. He was a
What if
flesh.
Moses is a collective summary of archetypes that were documented?
I'm sorry, say that again.
What if there is? I'm taking some issue with this the historicity of
Uh,
Moses. Okay, so we might have to back.
are you saying, is it because we have no clear historical evidence that Moses existed?
Correct.
Okay, but we have historical evidence that I mean,
No,
these,
we don't.
okay,
We don't have that either.
actually, I studied that. I think it's pretty clear something happened. And I could argue that I have
Yeah,
a
and what
scholar's knowledge of
happened?
that period.
Yeah, and what I'm trying to do here is I think what we've tapped on is we both have a fascination of getting really clean about what is
Yes.
this up from Eden thing. I didn't read
Yes.
up from Eden, but now you're tempting me because now I mean I pretty much know what I mean I grew up Catholic, so I kind of know what the
Ah,
spiral dynamic blue thing is. My sister, I
yes.
sent her a list of blue stuff saying, because she's right on the money still about all that, you know. And I just want to find out how blue she is. And I was brought up to be orange, but but I lived in the blossoming of green. And I got confused by all that. And so that's what the story of my life has been about, is figuring out how come that is. I have a if
Ah,
and the what I would put forth is that I would consider the mythic level to contain all Abrahamic concepts, as well as all Egyptian and
E-
all uh
Egyptian, yes.
uh
Abrahamic in much of the Old Testament, I would say yes,
okay.
mythic,
And you don't have to agree
but
with,
not the New
you know,
Testament, but
but
not the
I'm
New
just saying
Testament.
this is where I'm coming from these days.
Okay,
Okay.
okay,
And we can have another fun one where we pull out our books and say, I this is, I've got
okay.
my little pile of stuff. So
Yeah, but
but
I will point
anyway,
out,
yeah.
let me point out the gods and goddesses are not, never were human beings. They were never flesh and blood. They can fly through the air. They can change themselves into other forms. They're but the figures in the Abrahamic religions and in all of the axial age religions, their founders, whether they're legendary or whether there's historical evidence for them, they were flesh and blood human beings. Even if they were imagined, even if Moses was made up, they made up a flesh and blood human being who experienced miracles and could perform miracles because he was in touch with a transcendent divinity that transcended gods and goddesses. We're no longer dealing with forces, personified forces of nature that
And
are
I
immortal.
would grant the conceivability of being so good at your spiritual awareness that you could affect physical reality. Okay.
That the physical miracles could happen through you. Yes, they can happen
Yeah.
when
That's why
people are
voodoo works.
actually voodoo is when it works, it's operating on a different subtle
So
body, but
says
that's a
I
whole other
said that to be
discussion.
provocative, right?
That's a whole other discussion.
Okay, put that one down.
But
Do
you
you
see, so
have? Do you? Here's a statement. Let's see if you agree with this or not.
okay.
Um, when I think about the frame of mind, the level of consciousness, the day-to-dayness of being a person living in Greece or Rome, I believe that those people were were just as up to snuff in their sense of walking around in the world was not the beginning of 2001 Space Odyssey, it was people who were living lives that Shakespeare could have written about and said the
He
same
did.
stuff he said in the 16th century.
He did on some of the Anthony and Cleopatra. Yeah.
Well,
Some
but
of
he's
some of
projecting into
yeah.
that past those characteristics, and I would say that the one of the things that needs to be addressed and put into this mix is the predominance of megalithic pre-flood civilization not record, some records, but mostly big badass rocks that nobody can carve to this day. There's so much evidence that there are civilizations that precede our whole line of stuff that it's it begs the redesign of things as well. And so I happen to think that Abrahamic religions are mythic, um, and 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 no, and to the extent that they reflect real things, it was no less real that when the monkey men built the bridge to Sri Lanka. Okay, and that's
let's
showing
hear
up.
it. Let's hear it
Okay,
for Hanuman. Yeah.
yeah. Okay, so
Okay, to your first point.
okay.
Yes, the people who lived in ancient Greece and Rome at their heights, they were just as savvy, just as intelligent as we are today, just as capable. They had all of the interior wiring we do. They could function in their societies every bit as well. They were very sophisticated, and by that time, the upper classes were literate. And I mean, they discovered algebra. I mean, not algebra yet. The geometry. They were very sophisticated. However, they were not cognitively modern. Very few. And here's a story. This is from Suetonius's Lives of the Caesar. He's one of the Roman historians, and this took place. I think Suetonius, he was within a generation or two after the death of Christ, or early first century Common Era. This he wrote a chronicle of the lives of the Caesars. And here's an incident that happened that he knew about, that he recorded. A woman in a very high patrician family. This is one of the 1% in Rome, very wealthy, and she was a devotee of the temple of the Roman version of Dionysus. She a very respectable, wealthy matron, and this one man, another man of the patrician class, wanted to seduce her, but she was a virtuous Roman matron. She would have nothing to do with an illicit affair, and so he tried one thing. He tried another. He went to the priest at the temple where she worshipped, and he corrupted the priest with a lot of money. And the temple priest sent this woman a message that Dionysus was so taken with her piety and her beauty and her wonderfulness that he wanted to sleep with her. She rejoiced. She shared the news with her family and household. They rejoiced with her that she was so favored by the god. She, with great ceremony and perfumed and so on, she went to the temple, and the guy came under the cover of night, slept with her, and then later on he said, "Ha ha, I got you, ha 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 ha." Yeah, and because he was wealthier and more powerful, I mean, she had no way to get back. That still might makes right. They were only in the transition from red into amber. She had no recourse. She committed suicide.
And the same thing seems to have happened in the last year.
Well, but you would not have a person today believing that the God has fallen in love with you and wants to sleep with you. She swallowed the story. That's the story that she swallowed. See,
You,
that's the point. That was the hook that reeled her in. That would not work on a modern or postmodern person. But she believed it. She believed enough that there was a god Dionysus and that he loved her and he wanted to sleep with her, and this was an incredible honor.
I'm sure that there were priests who told that to nuns that
Oh, all
made
through the Middle Ages.
spun stories about the Lord and the needs of man and how you're helping out the church by jerking off a priest so that he doesn't have to have impure thoughts. Come on.
In the dirty stories from the old French, one of them is a story about a very ignorant peasant girl who didn't even know the facts of life, and a countrified, uh, they didn't have friars yet, a priest who taught this young woman how to put the devil in hell. It's
Okay.
pornographic, and
Oh,
she
okay.
loved it, and she kept bugging. Oh, wait, don't you want to put your devil in hell? Come on. And
Oh,
she started bug, yeah.
I'm a little
and
slow.
she totally swallowed, and that's the point. Oh, everybody just laughs. It's a pretty crude story in the old French.
And
Yeah.
it's my profession, which is singing songs from place to place, goes back to 14th century France to the Trouveries. They were
Ooh,
shocked monks and
yes,
basically intellectuals that were ne'er-do-wells in life, and they
yes.
traveled around playing music to make a living.
Wand Wandering bards.
Finance, yeah. So I walked through life in that tradition, and I think that what we've done here today is flesh out the part that doesn't get talked about too much, where everybody's excited about um, modernism versus postmodernism versus are you integral enough? And I'm came into this from the bottom up, Joseph Campbell stuff. So
Yes, yes.
I will look forward to uh, your fleshing out of this, of the bottom up from the muck stuff, because right around in there too, when we get up to, you can see where when we start talking what's mythic and what's magic, we've got different
Myth,
stuff.
mythic, magic, and I will add dogmatic. They are three very separate layers, and Ken Wilber completely fuses them. He has not differentiated them at all well. He confuses rather than elucidates between magic, mythic, and I will add dogmatic for the amber. That's where your dogma, you have writing at this point, the scriptures. Writing comes online around 4,500 years ago. And what happens over the next couple thousand years is the axial age religions come on. We now have scripture. We can spell out what we think and what we believe. And this corresponds to Piaget's concrete operational stage, which is rational. We are thinking out, we are writing it out, we are defining things in writing permanently. And so we can define what the dogma is, but that stage, that Piaget stage, that's age 7 to 11, tends to be very binary, good or evil, right or wrong, you're with us or you're against us. That's an underlying pattern across. So you want to get your dogma right, because that's how you go to heaven. That would be the Christian version. That you want to define, you want to be clear and put down in writing. What did the Buddha say? Oh, the Buddha said, and then you memorize it and then you write it down. So now we have scriptures. It's a whole different ballgame from the myths, which are about gods and goddesses who have human forms, but they're not human. They're immortal. They have superpowers. Now we're dealing with saints, prophets, who are human, and they may display miraculous powers, but that's because something transcendent that transcends the gods and goddesses is coming through them. It's a whole different ballgame. They tell the story, the kinds of stories are different. The Piaget level is different. So I would prefer to see a very clear differentiation. And this is, let me see, the first stage is sensory motor, that's the beige. The magic, okay, that's pretty clear. Mythic is number 3, that's the red. Amber, blue, the dogmatic religions is number 4. So second, third, and fourth stages. I would love to see, as a Finnish carpenter, Finish carpenter, in Ken Wilber's magnificent Aquel structure, I would like to see a much clearer and consistent um, set of categories for the second, third, and fourth stages. Now, we must always be careful, as Jung said, not to take our categories too rigidly, but these are our maps. We want them to be accurate. And I think there's some serious inaccuracies right in this part. It's Ken Wilber's map is mushy and needs some clarification. It could profit by some clarification. Happens to be my period of expertise in history, so I can tend to feel passionate. But I'm going to take this a little further here, and let me know if you get to a point where you need to start winding this down, if you want to explore this in the future. I think this is fun splitting hairs, but it has a very immediate impact today because it is the amber stage, the amber blue, the dogmatic, the traditional dogmatic axial age religions that are on fire in the United States. It's a third of our population here in the United States, according to Wilber, and they are in such distress. Look what they're doing to our sociopolitical system. And if they hear us call their religion mythic, what they're going to hear is they're going to say, your religion's a myth. Another term, a very popular term for myth these days, is a myth that needs to be exploded, urban myths, something that people believe that's just, hogwash. This is why I think it could end up being really unfortunate if we don't clarify our use of the language here, if this gets out. And we tend to make these, there's so much packed into the term mythic, into all these terms. We need to be very careful how we use them if we're trying to go out into the world today and speak to people outside our little Wilberian ghetto. And our understanding is say, oh, the dogmatic religions are myths. They're mythic. They're myths. They're things nobody believes anymore. Well, we let go of the dogmas, but that doesn't mean that the religion, the core of each religion, has these profound archetypal meanings that got expressed. And here Ken Wilber shines, because each stage, each discrete stage, can have any one of the state experiences all the way to absolute Buddhahood, right? Christ consciousness. But you are going to interpret that experience through the structures of your stage structure, whatever your cognitive stage is. If you are an animist, it's going to come out in the spirits and rocks and bushes and bends in the rivers. If you're at amber, you're going to have a vision of Christ and the Blessed Mother, and you're going to try to keep it within orthodoxy. People outside orthodoxy tended to get into trouble, like Saint Teresa of Avila. But you're going to understand, these are going to come through the layers of subtle bodies here. I'm getting myself in trouble. They're going to appear through that liminal space in your awareness and take shape themselves like iron filings. Like you've seen the
Oh, I
experiments.
get it. I get what you're saying. I
Right.
mean,
So you're going to interpret them. They're going to take shape and mirror. The kinds of stories you're going to tell about that will correspond to whether you are at the magic, mythic, dogmatic, rational, or post or existential level, or teal or turquoise or whatever. Those iron filings of that very high or low or whatever state experience are going to shape themselves in your awareness according to your cognitive structures. And those are the kinds of stories you're going to tell about them. So there are deep, profound, cosmic, absolute truths that express themselves even through the dogmatic, the miracle stories and the dogmas, through the myths of the gods and goddesses. I mean, goodness, what Freud did with the Oedipal. I mean, these are stories about our psyches. They're not just about the world. It's always two-faced. They're always left quadrants and right quadrants. They're talking about the structures of our psyches and the structures in the outside world, right? So how we, I guess I'm getting scattered now. Let me bring this back to where I was going. I'll try to wrap up. That Ken Wilber has some allergies and addictions of his own. If you're familiar with those terms from one of his books, he hasn't done, none of us have done all our shadow work. And Ken Wilber has some real issues with Amber. I mean, he has some real virulence towards some of the Christian dogmas, and he expresses them in intemperate language in some places. And he also has a lot of issues with toxic green. He expresses himself at great length and sometimes intemperately. He has his own inner issues that he has not completely worked through himself, and his fuzziness about some of these layers. I am interested to see how it kind of warps itself. His lack of precision, his imprecision, and even distortion of some of these, how he presents some of these stages, seems to wrap itself around his shadow
then
issues
it
with amber
wraps
and
around
green.
mine too.
Pardon?
And then it wraps around mine too in
All of
the
us,
same way.
all
Uh,
of us.
well,
And
I
Ken
mean,
Wilber is not an exception here.
okay, well, but you're saying that you're pointing to his um his I think he would take issue with Abrahamic versus Buddhistic uh
Yes.
quality of ideas, and I am 100% right there. I got that little statue behind me when I was
Uh-huh.
like 13 years old, and I've kept it all this
Which
time.
I can't
It's
quite see what it
it's
is.
just a little Buddha made out of
Oh,
stone or something, but
oh,
I keep that with me because that was the first time that I started to make that shift. Uh, but anyways, yeah, let's wrap this up here for today. And
okay.
for those of you watching, this has been uh Karen and Larry tearing apart the colors, especially the bottom end. And
And putting them back together again.
yes, and not with 100% agreement either. So
And I will
but
just add
certainly
one note.
respect.
My statue of the Buddha is upstairs, and I have my Thor's hammer around its neck.
Oh, cool. All righty. Uh Okay, so I'll talk to you at another time, and in the meantime, keep me in mind for um uh I will look forward to this writing of yours about these early stages and the mythological aspects of this,
I
because
have a chart. I have a
I
chart. I'll
want to
send it
get
to you.
clear. I want to get clear too about where I think about this stuff, or what I agree with and what I don't. Just like with
Hmm.
Steve McIntosh, it's like, do I agree with or don't I? You know. Okay, let's wrap.
Oh, this was fun. We must do this
Good.
again sometime.
Always a pleasure, Ken. See you next time.
Take
Bye
care.
bye.